I see my wife is in the back, and she's the honors biology teacher, so be nice, honey. I also had Ms. Bean as my college placement advisor, and I remember we had our meeting, and she said, well, you should look at Hamilton College. And I said, what's at Hamilton? I hadn't heard of it. Didn't have a football team that I had followed, and she said, no, you'll fit in there. It's a small school, and the teachers will know you, and you need that. Which is actually really good advice. And I know that my journey wouldn't have been the same if it hadn't been for Nancy's guidance in my life, and so I appreciate that. And that's just part of that Westminster education, that we have faculty members that really do care about our students and care about us as individuals. I too was an Alpha Omega. I was in Westminster from 1989 to 2002, and Westminster certainly taught me to take pride in my work. It taught me humility. I've made my best friends in life at Westminster. My best friend is, we've been friends since first grade, and we were best men for each other at each other's wedding. And that's just part, we have our same friend group, and it's been an incredible journey for us. Westminster taught me how to learn how to learn. It also taught me to work real hard, and it taught me to pick myself up for my failures. And I think those are the kind of life lessons that you guys are paying for. So don't worry, I know tuition's going up, but I still think it's worth it. I thought I was an average student at Westminster, maybe above average in history and English. Mr. Justice isn't here still, so I can say that.
Totally here.
About average, above average. At the same time, math and science were certainly challenges, which is ironic since I married a science teacher, but that's that yin and yang thing. I had trouble memorizing, which was certainly very common back then. I'm not quite sure why I need to memorize the periodic table, because if I was ever happened to be finding myself doing that, I'm imagining it would be on the wall. We had to memorize every prepositional phrase. But I learned how to learn that way. I can still remember all of having to give Patrick Henry's full speech to Dr. Young in the 7th grade. I can still give that full speech. And most of Jabberwocky from 5th grade, which is a poem that's frankly nonsensical. But it really did, it was that traditional education that challenged you. And you don't realize how well educated you are until you find yourself in the real world, and how well respected Westminster is. I know my journey, I've had a couple of just ironic Westminster instances that have changed my path, and they were not necessarily with people that I was closest to at Westminster, but there's something about when you know another Westminster alum that they went through it, that if they could do that they're intelligent folks, and that's our reputation, and that's something we shouldn't take for granted. Westminster also taught me I had some setbacks, and those setbacks actually were some of the best things that happened in my life. I guess it was middle school, I tore my knee on the last day of soccer tryouts, and I dislocated, tore some ligaments, and didn't make the team. And I was a soccer player my whole life, and then after that I tried out for the tennis team once my knee got better in 9th grade, and it was okay. I made the last spot. I was pretty athletic, but some of these kids were actually really good, and I didn't enjoy the lack of a team atmosphere. So I ended up rowing crew. My dad rowed in college and said, hey, if it's not the hardest workout you've ever had, you don't have to do it again. So I learned a valuable lesson, which was to try something new, and also don't take a bet with your old man. But I did row. I rowed varsity crew for Atlanta Juniors. My boat, we qualified for nationals, and I got to row at the national competition. And then in college, I was able to row as a varsity as a freshman, which was just a great team building experience. The reason I tell you this was A, for the setback, and B, is when I met my wife at a party, she had also been a rower in college, and she didn't believe me when she said I rowed in college. So me too, and but that didn't break the ice, and that's so you never know. Then she told me she was an immunologist, and I had to Google it so we can. Also true. But other setbacks that changed my life that were at Westminster, that aside from this academic challenge that I was that I was in, and like all Westminster students, you find that there's always someone smarter than you, there's always someone more athletic than you, there's always someone better looking than you, richer than you, but you don't realize that you're in a pretty unique pool when you're out in the real world. But your Westminster bubble is different. It's all a matter of perspective. But when we were talking about this earlier, I was on the debate team, and one of my closest friends was my debate partner, and we had a falling out, and we were done debating. What happened was I decided, well, you know what, I enjoy this public speaking. Hopefully, I'm not embarrassing myself now, but that I did enjoy public speaking, and so I tried out for the mock trial team, and I made it. And what happened was I spent 2 more years on Westminster's mock trial team, and when I went to Hamilton College, they didn't have a mock trial team. And this was one of these formative things, and I decided, well, I'm going to start one. Why not? I can do that. And I talked to the faculty advisor, who was the philosophy professor, which somehow was the closest thing we had to a pre-law, but which is ironic. I'm a lawyer. The Bible doesn't come up too much in what we do. But he said, well, sure. Here's $500 and a video camera. Why don't you go to Yale, which was the closest competition, see what it's like, take a video, and come back, and if you think you can swing it, come up with a business plan, and we could start a club. Okay, so we did what anyone would do, and took our $500 and partied in Yale, and took a video competition. But we did come back, and Professor Simon was his name, and he was kind enough to trust us. He said, okay. What happened was I realized I needed money, and so someone said, well, you should join Student Assembly. If you join Student Assembly, that's who controls the club money, and sort of the fox guarding the hen house. So I got elected vice president of my class, and which was ironic, as someone from Atlanta, it was me and a girl from Pace. Everyone else was a Yankee, so I didn't know anyone. But I was able to somehow win. It maybe was not much of a challenge because no one else wanted to do it, but I did win. And I ended up serving in the Student Assembly. What happened was our president of our class got expelled or something and didn't have grades. So suddenly I find myself sort of acting as president. And the next year I was elected president of my class. And that resulted in us controlling the budget. We ended up raising about $20,000 in club budget. We hired coaches. We had to take care of the logistics of traveling about 20 students all around the country to compete throughout the year. And we were able to work with the school to establish an endowment program. And this team was started in 2002. Before I graduated, we competed at nationals, and the team is still ongoing. And the team's returned to nationals since then. And I know that hundreds of kids' lives have been changed. And that was something that was really fulfilling, all because I got in spat and the debate team didn't work out. So that sort of gave me the confidence that I can change things. And I had just some great professors at college, and one of them was an ambassador who took great interest in me, and he was an alum. And I had originally started as an economics major because I thought, well, I'll get my law degree, but business is more interesting. I really loved Ms. Finch's class. Turns out econ is hard. Their class was Friday mornings at 8, which didn't appeal to certain other activities. And what I found was in government classes, I was doing better. And I said, well, I'll switch my major. And I was enjoying the student assembly and things that I just really was doing is something that was an activity, and it turned out to be something I grew passionate about. This professor helped me get an internship. You mentioned internships. They are incredibly good opportunities for young people. And I had one on the House Judiciary Subcommittee of Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security. I thought it was a big deal, and then the chairman said, get me 2 Diet Cokes on my first day, and it was sort of like that. But it was a very interesting time in my life because it was during the Patriot Act, and that was right after 9/11, which we're of that age where that was a major moment, and we felt we were on the ground floor of policy and changing things. And then this ambassador who had taken interest in me helped get me an internship at the U.S. State Department, where I applied. I was one of hundreds of kids that applied for this program. I was one of about 5 that would get a top secret security clearance, and my job was to go and visit with head of state visits and win diplomatic affairs. So when you see that, for example, hypothetically, we throw out 60 Russian people and then close the consulate, the same thing happens reciprocally, and that's what I got. I was applying for, but it was a real long shot, and I was asked to come down, and they said, "Will you meet at the Blair House?" Blair House, for those who don't know, is the presidential guest house. It's across from the White House. I'm just, wow, this is an amazing thing. And the person, the chief of protocol at the time, was President Bush's roommate when he met his wife, and his name was Ambassador Ensign. And they said, "You get 5 minutes." I drove all the way, down from upstate New York to meet with Ambassador Ensign. And he goes, "Why should I hire you?" And he goes, "Well," and I handed him my resume. And he goes, "Well, I see you went to Westminster." Oh, I did. And he goes, "Well, my son is at school in Texas, and his best friend went to Westminster's in your class, and he's a smart guy, and if you're half as smart as him, you're hired." And I was like, "Wow, getting out of here." But it changed my life, because I was competing with guys at Harvard and Yale, and it was a very competitive responsibility, but that occurred just as that little Westminster thing, and it was someone I was been friendly with, but it was not my best friend. But that's just the luck, and this sort of idea that Westminster community is all over the place, even where you least expect it. So to fast forward, I got much more involved in politics. I was elected the president of the College Republicans, which also wasn't hard on a liberal Northeast college campus. I try to pick my battles. So I was elected out of 5 people probably, and ultimately decided to apply to law school and change my course. And as I applied to Emory Law, and lo and behold, one of my other Westminster classmates from Ms. Penn's homeroom, his father was the interim dean of the law school, Frank Alexander at the time. And he said, "Oh, you know Graham?" Well, yeah. And I'd like to think that there was just that little bit of nudge that helped get me in, and it changed my life. Over the course of law school, I completely overworked. You have all these restrictions on how much you can work, and I abused that, because I always found that working in the real world was more interesting than these hypothetical classes and cases, and I had the opportunity to intern in the Cobb County District Attorney's Office in the appellate division as well as in the trial division. And again, I kept that interest in politics alive, which again was not something I had ever really thought about doing. I should take one caveat to go back to Westminster. One other thing that just sort of happened fortuitously was Johnny Isakson was elected to Congress when Newt Gingrich decided to retire, so this was about 96 or so, and he decided to do a program called Youth Talkback. And the idea was that he was going to have a student from each school meet with him quarterly to talk policy. And some teacher out there nominated me. I don't even know who, but I had the chance to meet with the congressman and talk with him, and that was really probably the starting of this interest in policy. And I kept in touch with him and his staff, and now he's our senior United States Senator. But I had always sort of been lucky, sort of being in the right place at the right time, I think. And when I was in law school, I again got elected to the president of the Federalist Society. Again, not many conservative people at Emory Law School. And I got a call one day from the governor's office and the governor's executive council, who turned out he went to Pace, but luckily the deputy was a Westminster alum also. He called and said, "Look, we're looking to have someone work for the governor's executive council during session." We were just calling the Federal Society because it was Governor Perdue at the time. And do you know of anyone? And I was already working in the DA's office and had maxed out my number of hours that you're allowed to work and excuse yourself from school. I said, "Sure, me, So I took the job, and I barely studied. My grades probably showed it, but I had the opportunity to sit between the governor's personal desk and his chief of staff during a legislative session, and that changed my life, because one day, Wendell Willard, the state representative from my home district, walked in and said, I'm retiring. And the governor's lawyer said, well, you're running. I'm running. What are you talking about? I mean, maybe one day. He goes, well, this opportunity happens once every 20 years or so. You should run. I said, well, I'll think about it. And I thought about it and said, why not? I have nothing to lose. Worst case scenario, I'm in the same boat. Maybe a couple negative mailers to my mother, which I'd like to avoid. But and I took that risk. Politics happened, and Wendell didn't retire until this year, and now I'm the Republican nominee for that seat. And so, actually running against a fellow Westminster alum, but we don't need to talk about him. Democratic ticket. But it's kind of funny how these sort of opportunities in Westminster has come in your life, and I'm forever grateful for it. I don't know where it'll take me. I'm proud to be a lawyer. If that's all that happens in my life, I feel like I help people every day, and that's really fulfilling. Some days you want to pull your hair out, but I couldn't imagine doing anything else. And the Lord works in mysterious ways. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.